The hot chocolate hit the floor at 8:30 on a Saturday morning, and the sound of ceramic shattering against tile cut through groundwork coffee like a gunshot. Ava froze. 7 years old, 2 neat cornrow braids tied with purple bands at the ends. Her eyes went wide, locked on the damage, on the woman rising from her chair like a storm gathering speed. Victoria Stanton stood up so fast her macchiato nearly toppled. Her face flushed red from the neck up. "Are you kidding me?" Her voice carried. It was designed to carry. "Do you have any idea how much these cost?" Ava didn't answer. Couldn't. Her bottom lip trembled, and her small hands opened and closed at her sides, reaching for something that wasn't there. "This is what happens when children aren't taught basic awareness," Victoria announced to no one in particular, to everyone in particular. "Whose child is this? Someone needs to control their kid before she destroys property that's actually worth something." Marcus Jackson was already moving from the pickup counter. He didn't run. Running would have made it worse, would have made him look like a man who had something to prove or something to hide. He walked. Deliberate. Calm. His work boots made solid, even sounds against the tile. He reached Ava and put one hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said, low, just for her. "I got you." Then he looked up at Victoria Stanton. Marcus was tall, 6'3" in boots, with shoulders that filled out a plain gray Henley in ways that suggested physical labor wasn't a stranger to him. But it was the scar that people noticed first when they got close enough. It ran from his left temple down to his jawline, a pale, raised line that pulled slightly when he talked, a permanent reminder of something he never discussed. Under the warm yellow lights of groundwork, it looked almost deliberate. Like a signature. "I'm her father." His voice was quiet, but it carried differently than Victoria's. Hers had cut. His filled. "She's 7. It was an accident. I need you to apologize to her." The coffee shop went silent. Not the kind of silent where people stop talking. The kind where they stop breathing. Victoria blinked. Then she laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the kind of laugh people used to buy time while they decided how hard to swing. Apologize? To her? She looked Marcus up and down, slowly, openly, the way someone might inspect a used car they'd already decided not to buy. The Henley. The worn jeans. The boots with concrete dust still in the seams. "Do you know who I am? I'm Victoria Stanton. One phone call. That's all it takes. One call to Child Protective Services and a lawyer, and we'll see how long a man like you keeps custody of a child he clearly can't supervise." Ava started crying then. Not loud, attention-getting crying. Worse. The quiet kind. The kind kids learn when they've already figured out that noise makes things more dangerous. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she gripped her father's pant leg with both fists, knuckles small and tight and desperate. Marcus didn't look down. He kept his eyes on Victoria, and his expression didn't shift. Not angry. Not scared. Something else entirely. Something calmer than the situation had any right to contain. "I'm not going to ask again," he said. "Apologize to my daughter." Victoria's hand was already on her phone, screen lit, finger hovering. Her mouth curved into something that was almost a smile but wasn't. Victoria didn't wait for a response. She was already dialing, the phone pressed to her ear with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no by anything with a dial tone. "Richard, it's Victoria. I need you to look into someone for me. A man. At Groundwork Coffee on 14th. He has a child with him, a little girl, and I have serious concerns about her welfare." "Yes. Yes, I'll hold. Janice, it's Vic. I need a favor. CPS, caseworker level. I'm looking at a situation right now that needs immediate attention. Neglect, at minimum. The father is, her eyes dragged over Marcus like he was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe, not the kind of man who should be raising a child unsupervised. I want a home visit. I want it fast. Call me back. Marcus had heard every word. She'd made sure of it. The threat hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that hadn't started yet, but everyone in that coffee shop could smell it coming. He didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he turned his back to Victoria Stanton and lowered himself down onto one knee, right there on the tile floor, until his eyes were level with Ava's. Everything he had was focused on the small, shaking girl in front of him. "Hey," Marcus said, and his voice was different now. Softer than before. Not the voice he'd used with Victoria. This one was just for Ava. "Look at me, baby girl." "You didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said, answering the question she hadn't spoken. He reached up and wiped the tears from her left cheek with his thumb, then her right. "I need you to hear me say it. You didn't do anything wrong. That woman is angry about something that has nothing to do with you, and she's taking it out on you because she can. But that's her problem. Not yours. Never yours." He waited until she nodded again, and this time the nod was steadier. A little stronger. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you," he said. "Not ever. Not while I'm breathing. You believe me?" "Yes, Daddy." Her voice was tiny, but it was there. "Good girl." He squeezed her shoulder once, firm and warm, and then he stood up. When he did, he positioned himself so that Ava was directly behind him. Not hidden, he wasn't going to teach her to hide, but shielded. Protected. His body was a wall between her and whatever came next. Victoria had been watching the whole exchange with an expression that shifted from contempt to impatience to something uglier. When Marcus turned back to face her, she was already stepping closer, closing the distance he'd created. "That's adorable," she said, and the word dripped with sarcasm thick enough to choke on. "Really? Father of the Year material. But you should have thought about that before you let your kid run wild in public. Before you walked in here looking like," she gestured at all of him, at the scar, at the boots, at the life she'd already decided he was living, like that. Marcus didn't move. "I'm going to make you lose everything," Victoria said, and now her voice dropped, losing the performative edge, gaining something colder. More honest. "And I'm going to start with her." She raised her hand. It happened fast. Faster than anyone expected. The slap cracked across Marcus's face with a sound that was sharp and wet and final, like a door slamming shut on something that could never be opened again. His head turned slightly with the impact, but his body didn't move. His feet stayed planted. His shoulders stayed square. Victoria's palm was still stinging from the slap when she spun around to face Bradley, her eyes blazing with the fury of someone who had never been disobeyed by anyone she paid. "Get him out of my sight," she said. "Now." Bradley didn't move. The silence that followed was thicker than the steam rising from the espresso machine. Every head in Groundwork Coffee turned toward the man in the dark suit who had been Victoria Stanton's shadow for 6 years, through 3 corporate restructurings and 2 harassment settlements that never made it to court. He was the fixer. The enforcer. The guy who made problems disappear before they became scandals. But right now, Bradley wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at Marcus. And his face had gone pale. "I can't," Bradley said. His voice cracked on the second word, and something flickered behind his eyes that nobody in that coffee shop had ever seen before. Not hesitation. Not fear. Recognition. "I can't do it, Mrs. Stanton. This man saved my life." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since she'd walked through the door, she had nothing to say. Bradley took a step forward, and when he spoke again, his voice was rough, scraped raw by a memory he'd spent 14 years trying to bury. Kandahar, Afghanistan. March 14, 2009. He wasn't performing. Wasn't telling a story for the crowd. He was back there, in the dust and the heat and the screaming. A rocket came through the second-floor window at 0230 hours. The whole building went up. I was trapped in a back room with my team leader, Davis. The fire was everywhere. Smoke so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We were done. Both of us knew it. Davis was praying. I was trying to text my mom. Bradley's jaw tightened. He pointed at Marcus, and his hand was shaking. This man came through the flames. Twice. First time, he found Davis and carried him out over his shoulder. Then he came back for me. I was pinned under a collapsed beam. He lifted it. I don't know how. The heat was melting the rubber on his boots. And then, right when he was dragging me toward the exit, a secondary explosion went off maybe 15 feet away. Shrapnel tore through the wall. One piece caught him right here. Bradley touched his own left cheek, tracing a line from temple to jaw. And he didn't stop. Didn't drop me. Didn't even slow down. He got me outside, laid me down next to Davis, and then he collapsed. They flew him to Landstuhl with metal in his face and third-degree burns on 40% of his body. He was in a coma for 11 days. Bradley turned to face Victoria fully, and his eyes were wet. Delta Force. 2nd Battalion. The kind of soldier they write books about. And you just slapped him across the face because your latte wasn't hot enough. The coffee shop was dead silent. Even the barista had stopped wiping down the counter, her rag suspended in midair, dripping onto the floor. Then, from the corner of the room, a sound broke the stillness. The scrape of a chair against tile. An older man, black, late 60s maybe, with a gray beard trimmed neat and a veteran's cap pulled low over his forehead, was rising to his feet. He'd been sitting in the corner booth nursing a black coffee, forgotten by everyone. Now he straightened his back, adjusted the cap so the insignia faced forward, 82nd Airborne, same unit, and lifted his right hand to his brow in a slow, deliberate salute. He didn't say a word. 2 officers stepped inside. The first one, a stocky black man with sergeant stripes on his sleeve and the kind of tired eyes that came from 20 years of dealing with people at their worst, scanned the room like he was reading a crime scene that hadn't happened yet. His partner, a younger white woman with her hand resting casually on her belt, hung back by the door, blocking the exit without making it obvious. Somebody called us about a disturbance, the sergeant said, and his voice was calm but it cut through the silence like a blade through butter. Anybody want to tell me what's going on here? Victoria moved before anyone else could breathe. Her composure snapped back into place like a rubber band, and she pointed one manicured finger directly at Marcus's chest. This man threatened me. He was aggressive, he got in my face, and I want him removed from these premises immediately. I have witnesses. Sir. The sergeant said, addressing Marcus directly. You want to tell me your side? Before Marcus could open his mouth, Rachel stepped forward. She'd been standing near the counter, her phone clutched in both hands, her knuckles white. She looked terrified. The kind of terrified that came from knowing you were about to do something that would change everything and doing it anyway. I have video, she said, and her voice wavered but didn't break. I recorded the whole thing. From the moment Mrs. Stanton walked in. Rachel didn't look at her. She was looking at the sergeant, and she was holding out her phone like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. It's 43 minutes long. I started recording when she threw the hot chocolate at the little girl. The sergeant took the phone. His partner stepped away from the door and came to stand beside him, and together they watched the screen. Rachel had already queued it up. The video started with Victoria's voice, sharp and cutting, and then the sound of ceramic shattering, and then Ava's small, terrified cry. The sergeant's jaw tightened. His partner's hand dropped away from her belt. Victoria's face went through 3 shades of pale. "That's taken out of context," she said, but her voice had lost its edge, and everyone in the room could hear it. "I was defending myself. He was aggressive. He—" "Ma'am," the sergeant said, and he didn't raise his voice, but Victoria stopped talking like he'd pressed a mute button. "I'm going to need you to step outside with me." "What?" "No. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Stanton." He said it without malice, but also without deference. "And right now, you're someone who threw a cup of hot liquid at a 7-year-old child. So I'm going to ask you again. Step outside." Victoria didn't move. Her mouth opened and closed, and for the second time that morning, she had nothing to say. The younger officer stepped forward and gestured toward the door, and Victoria walked out ahead of them like a woman who had just realized the ground beneath her feet was made of paper. Through the cafe window, Marcus could see the sergeant talking to her on the sidewalk. Victoria was gesturing wildly, pointing back at the cafe, at Marcus, at Rachel. The sergeant was nodding, his face unreadable, and then he said something that made Victoria stop moving entirely. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her shoulders sagged. The younger officer came back inside. She walked over to Rachel and handed her the phone. Ava was at his sister's place in Baltimore. He'd made that call 3 days ago, after the lawyer explained what the hearing would look like, how long it might run, what Victoria's team would probably try to pull. Ava had asked him one question before she left: "Daddy, is that lady going to say sorry for real, or is she just going to say it because she has to?" 7 years old, and she'd already learned the difference. Marcus hadn't had an answer. He thought about turning around. He thought about Ava's question. He thought about the video on Rachel's phone, 43 minutes of footage that had already been submitted as evidence, that had already been viewed by the judge in chambers, that had already, according to his lawyer, made Victoria's defense team very, very nervous. And then he walked inside. The hearing room was smaller than he'd expected. Not a courtroom, exactly, this was a civil proceeding, not a criminal trial, but it had the same architecture of authority. Wood paneling the color of old coffee. Rows of benches that creaked when you sat down. A raised platform for the judge, empty for now, but dominating the room like an altar. Marcus took a seat in the front row, left side, near the window. People filed in slowly. A court reporter set up her machine near the front, her fingers already moving in practice patterns, a soft click-click-click that sounded like insects. 2 clerks shuffled papers at a side table. Marcus's lawyer, a young black woman named Angela Okonkwo who'd taken his case pro bono after seeing the video, sat down beside him and touched his arm once, briefly, a gesture that meant nothing and everything. "She's here," Angela said quietly. "She came alone. No husband. No entourage. Just her and her lawyer." Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He could feel Victoria's presence the way you feel a storm before the rain starts, a change in pressure, a tightness in the air. The judge entered at 9:03. Judge Patricia Morrison, a black woman in her late 50s with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of face that had seen enough nonsense to be immune to it. She settled into her chair, adjusted her glasses, and spent 4 minutes reading through the case file while the room held its breath. Then she looked up, and her gaze swept across the room like a searchlight. "This is an unusual case," she said, and her voice was flat, measured, the voice of someone who had learned a long time ago that emotion in a courtroom was a tool best used sparingly. "We're here today because the respondent, Mrs. Victoria Stanton, has requested the opportunity to make a statement prior to the court's ruling on the civil harassment petition filed by Mr. Marcus Jackson. I've reviewed the evidence. I've watched the video. Mrs. Stanton, your attorney has indicated that you wish to address the court directly. Is that correct? Victoria stood up. She was wearing a gray suit, simple, almost plain, nothing like the designer pieces she'd worn at Groundwork Coffee. Her hair was pulled back. No jewelry except a thin gold chain at her throat. She looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Not physically, she was still tall, still imposing in the way that wealthy people carried themselves, but there was something diminished about her, something that had been scraped away. Her lawyer, a white man in an expensive navy suit, was holding a stack of papers and trying to catch her eye, but Victoria wasn't looking at him. The package arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, no return address, no postmark beyond the standard sorting center stamp from downtown. Inside, nestled in brown packing paper, was a hardcover coloring book about horse breeds. Arabian, Appaloosa, Clydesdale. And next to the book, a box of colored pencils, the good kind, the kind with names like burnt sienna and cerulean blue printed on the sides in gold lettering. Ava standing in front of the little bookstore near Groundwork Coffee, her face pressed almost against the glass, her breath fogging up the window as she stared at that exact same cover. She had stood there for almost 10 minutes that Saturday morning, the morning that everything went sideways, the morning Victoria Stanton decided that a 7-year-old girl and her father were a threat that needed to be neutralized. That note had gotten buried under police reports and lawyer meetings and custody hearings and all the other debris that Victoria Stanton had dumped into their lives. He reached into the box and pulled out the letter. I know I can't fix what I did. I think about it every day. I remember how you looked at those horses, and I hope you still like them. I'm trying to be better. Every day, I'm trying. No signature. No name. Just those 4 sentences, and the weight they carried. Marcus stood there for a long time, the letter in his hand, the kitchen quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's television through the wall. He thought about the hearing. He thought about Victoria standing in that wood-paneled room, her voice cracking as she tried to explain herself to Judge Morrison. He thought about the way she had looked at him afterward, not with defiance, not with the cold superiority she had worn like armor at Groundwork Coffee, but with something that looked almost like shame. He had not forgiven her. He was not sure he ever would. But he had watched her try, in her own broken way, to do something that rich people almost never did, admit she was wrong. He called Ava into the kitchen. She came running, her socks sliding on the linoleum, her braids bouncing against her shoulders. She was 8 now, a little taller, a little more curious, still carrying that same quiet gravity that she had inherited from her mother. When she saw the coloring book, she stopped dead in the middle of the kitchen. Her mouth opened. Her eyes went wide. And then she let out a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a gasp, the kind of sound that children make when the world gives them something they had stopped hoping for. The horse book, she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Daddy, it's the horse book. I know, baby. Where did it come from? Marcus hesitated. He could have lied. He could have said it was from Santa, or from a friend, or from any of the dozen safe explanations that would have protected her from the complicated truth. But Ava was not a child who needed protecting from the truth. She had stood in the middle of Groundwork Coffee while a stranger screamed at her father. She had watched him stay calm when the police arrived. She had asked him, before the hearing, whether that lady was going to say sorry. She deserved an answer that was real. It's from the woman, he said. The one from the coffee shop. Ava looked down at the book, then back up at him.